The morning rain drummed steadily against the tall windows of Kensington Palace, creating a gentle rhythm that echoed through the grand corridors. Guard Captain James Morrison stood at his usual post near the main entrance, his polished boots firmly planted on the marble floor. At 52 years old, James had served the royal family for nearly 3 decades, and he understood his role perfectly. To be seen but not heard, to protect but remain invisible, to serve with dignity while maintaining proper distance. James had witnessed countless moments in royal life. He had seen princes take their first steps, watched young royals grow from toddlers to teenagers, and observed the careful balance of public duty and private family moments. Yet in all his years of service, he had learned that his position required him to blend into the background, like the ornate wallpaper that adorned the palace walls. This particular Tuesday started like any other. Prince William and Catherine had left early for their official engagements, leaving the children in the capable hands of their nanny and the household staff. Prince George, now 10 years old, had finished his morning lessons and was exploring the quieter sections of the palace, something he often did when his parents were away. James noticed the young prince walking slowly down the corridor, his school books tucked under one arm. The boy seemed different today, more thoughtful than usual. His usual confident stride had been replaced by a slower, more contemplative pace. As George approached the area where James stood guard, the captain straightened his shoulders and fixed his gaze ahead, as protocol demanded. What happened next caught James completely off guard. "Good morning, Captain Morrison," Prince George said softly, stopping directly in front of the guard. James blinked in surprise. In nearly 30 years of service, no member of the royal family had ever addressed him by name during his duty hours. He knew the protocols by heart: acknowledge respectfully, respond briefly if required, and maintain professional distance. But something in the young prince's voice made him look down at the boy's face. George's eyes held an unusual seriousness, and James noticed the slight tremor in the boy's lower lip. "Your Highness," James replied with a formal nod, unsure of how to proceed. "Captain Morrison, may I ask you something?" George continued, his voice barely above a whisper. James glanced around the empty corridor, feeling suddenly uncertain about the rules that had guided him for so many years. The child before him wasn't just a future king. He was a 10-year-old boy who seemed to need something that went beyond formal protocols. "Of course, Your Highness," James answered carefully. George shifted his books to his other arm and looked up at the tall guard with eyes that seemed far too mature for his age. "Do you think it's normal to feel sad sometimes, even when everything seems perfect?" The question hung in the air between them like morning mist. James felt his carefully constructed professional walls begin to crack. Here was a child, royal or not, reaching out with a vulnerability that transcended all the rules and regulations that usually governed their interactions. James had 2 children of his own, both grown now, and he remembered the weight of childhood emotions that seemed impossible to explain. He looked down at Prince George and saw not the future king, but a young boy struggling with feelings he couldn't quite understand. "Your Highness," James began slowly, "I believe that feeling sad sometimes is one of the most normal things in the world. Even when everything around us looks perfect, our hearts sometimes carry worries or thoughts that we can't quite explain." George's shoulders relaxed slightly, and he set his books down on a nearby antique table. "Really? Even for adults?" "Especially for adults," James replied with a gentle smile that surprised even himself. "Sometimes we grown-ups are just better at hiding those feelings behind our serious faces and formal uniforms." For the first time that morning, a small smile appeared on George's face. "You don't seem like you're hiding anything right now, Captain Morrison." James chuckled softly, realizing that this conversation was unlike anything he had experienced in his long career. "Well, Your Highness, sometimes when we meet someone who's brave enough to share their honest feelings, it makes us want to be honest too. My father says that being brave isn't about not feeling scared or sad," George said thoughtfully. "He says it's about still doing the right thing even when those feelings are there." "Your father is a wise man," James replied. George looked up at the ornate ceiling, then back at James. "Sometimes I worry about all the things I'm supposed to do when I grow up, all the people I'm supposed to help, and all the things I'm supposed to know. What if I'm not good enough?" James felt his heart clench at the honesty in the boy's voice. Here was a child carrying the weight of a future crown, worrying about responsibilities that most adults would find overwhelming. In that moment, all the protocols and rules seemed far less important than the human connection happening between them. "Your Highness," James said gently, kneeling down so he could meet George's eyes at the same level. "May I share something with you that I've learned in all my years of service?" George nodded eagerly. "I've watched your family for many years, and I've seen something remarkable. I've seen that the best leaders aren't the ones who never feel worried or uncertain. They're the ones who care so much about doing right by others that they sometimes worry if they're good enough. The fact that you're thinking about these things now at your age tells me that you're going to be exactly the kind of leader people need." George's eyes widened with something that looked like relief mixed with hope. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," James said with conviction. "And here's something else I know. You don't have to carry all those worries by yourself. That's what family is for, what friends are for, and what people like me are for." "People like you?" George asked curiously. "People who believe in you and want to help you succeed," James explained. "Your Highness, every person in this palace, from the kitchen staff to the senior advisors, we're all here because we want to support you and your family. You're never going to be alone in facing whatever comes." George picked up his books again, but his posture had changed. The weight he had been carrying seemed lighter somehow. "Captain Morrison, thank you for talking with me like a real person." James stood up, straightening his uniform. "Your Highness, you are a real person. Never forget that. The crown you'll wear someday doesn't change the fact that you have a kind heart and a thoughtful mind." As George prepared to continue down the corridor, he paused and looked back at James. "Captain Morrison, would it be all right if we talked again sometime? I mean, when you're not too busy with your guard duties?" James felt something shift inside his chest. Something warm and unexpected. "Your Highness, it would be my honor." George smiled brightly and headed down the hallway, his steps noticeably lighter than they had been when he arrived. James watched him go, feeling as though something fundamental had changed in those few minutes of conversation. As he resumed his post, James reflected on what had just occurred. In 3 decades of service, he had never broken protocol so completely, had never allowed himself to be so genuinely human while on duty. Yet somehow, it felt like the most important thing he had ever done in his career. The rain outside had stopped, and afternoon sunlight began streaming through the palace windows, casting warm golden patterns on the corridor floor. James stood a little straighter, not because protocol demanded it, but because he felt honored to be exactly where he was, serving a family that had just shown him something he had never expected: genuine trust and human connection. 3 weeks passed since that morning conversation, and James found himself looking forward to his shifts with an enthusiasm he hadn't felt in years. Prince George had kept his word about wanting to talk again, though their conversations remained brief and always when the corridor was empty. The young prince had developed a habit of stopping by James's post, sometimes just to say good morning, other times to share a thought or ask a question about the world beyond the palace walls. James had begun to see sides of the royal family that his formal training had never prepared him for. Prince George wasn't just a future king learning his duties. He was a curious, thoughtful child who noticed things that others missed. He asked about James's family, remembered details about their previous conversations, and showed genuine interest in the lives of the people around him. On this particular Thursday morning, James arrived at the palace to find the usual bustle of activity, but with an undercurrent of tension he couldn't quite identify. The household staff moved with their typical efficiency, yet there seemed to be whispered conversations and concerned glances exchanged in the hallways. James took his position and was adjusting his uniform when Prince George appeared. But this time, he wasn't alone. Princess Charlotte walked beside him, and both children carried what appeared to be small wrapped packages. Their faces showed a mixture of excitement and nervousness that James recognized from his own children when they were planning surprises. "Good morning, Captain Morrison," George said with his usual politeness, but James detected something different in his voice today. "Good morning, Your Highness, Your Royal Highness," James replied, nodding to both children. Charlotte stepped forward slightly, her confidence evident even at her young age. "Captain Morrison, George told me about your conversations, and we have something we'd like to share with you." James felt a flutter of uncertainty. The children approaching him together, carrying packages, seemed to be venturing into uncharted territory. He glanced around the corridor, grateful it was empty during this quiet morning hour. "We heard something from Mother yesterday," George began, his voice serious. "She mentioned that it was your birthday last week and that you spent it working here at the palace instead of being home with your family." James felt his chest tighten. He had indeed worked on his birthday, covering for a colleague who had fallen ill, but he never expected anyone in the royal family to know or care about such details. "Your Highness, that's quite all right. It's part of the job." "But it's not all right," Charlotte said firmly, displaying the same determined spirit that James had observed in her mother. "Birthdays should be celebrated, especially for people who take such good care of us." George held out his package to James. "We made something for you. Well, Charlotte helped, but she's better at the artistic parts." James looked down at the carefully wrapped item, his hands trembling slightly as he accepted it. In 30 years of service, he had never received a personal gift from any member of the royal family. The weight of the moment settled on him as he carefully unwrapped the paper. Inside was a hand-drawn card with a picture of the palace, but drawn from a guard's perspective, looking out from the entrance toward the gates. The artwork was clearly Charlotte's, with her attention to detail and natural artistic talent evident in every line. But it was the message inside, written in George's careful handwriting, that made James's throat tighten with emotion. "Dear Captain Morrison," the card read, "thank you for keeping us safe every day, and for being someone who listens with kindness. Happy birthday from your friends, George and Charlotte." James stared at the word friends for a long moment. In 3 decades of royal service, he had been called many things: guard, captain, sir, but never friend. The simple word carried a weight that was both humbling and profound. "Your Highnesses," James began, his voice rougher than usual. This is the most thoughtful gift I've ever received." Charlotte beamed with pride while George looked relieved. "There's more," Charlotte announced, producing her own package. This one contained homemade biscuits, clearly from the palace kitchen, but bearing the imperfect shapes that showed they had been made by small hands rather than professional chefs. A note attached explained that George had asked the kitchen staff to teach him how to make James's favorite biscuits, information the prince had gathered during one of their corridor conversations weeks earlier. "You remembered that I mentioned loving my grandmother's digestive biscuits," James said in amazement. George nodded enthusiastically. "The kitchen staff helped me, but I did all the mixing and shaping myself. Cook said they're not perfect, but she thought you'd like them anyway." James held the package of slightly lopsided biscuits as if they were made of gold. "Your Highness, these are absolutely perfect." What struck James most deeply wasn't just the gifts themselves, but the thought and planning that had gone into them. George had remembered a casual comment about biscuits made weeks ago. The children had coordinated their efforts, involved the kitchen staff, and created something personal and meaningful. Most remarkably, they had done it all without any fanfare or expectation of recognition. "May I ask how you knew about my birthday?" James inquired. George looked slightly embarrassed. "I asked Mother about the palace staff, about whether we knew enough about the people who work here. She told me about your birthday, and about how you stayed to work even though you could have had the day off. She said you've never missed a day of work in 15 years. 15 years, Charlotte repeated with wide eyes. That's longer than I've been alive. James chuckled at her mathematical observation, but internally he was processing what George had told him. The young prince had specifically asked his mother about the palace staff, had shown initiative in learning about the people around him. It spoke to a character that was developing far beyond his years. "Your Highnesses, may I share something with you?" James asked. Both children nodded eagerly. "In all my years of service, I've learned that true leadership isn't about having power over people. It's about caring enough to know the people around you, to remember what matters to them, and to take action when you see an opportunity to make someone's day better. What you've done today shows me that you both understand that already." George and Charlotte exchanged a look, and James could see that his words meant something to them. "Father says that being royal means being responsible for other people's happiness," George said thoughtfully. "But I think it's more than just responsibility. I think it's supposed to feel good to make other people happy." "It does feel good," Charlotte agreed. "Making these gifts for you made me happy too." James felt overwhelmed by the wisdom and genuine kindness he was witnessing. These children, born into extraordinary privilege and responsibility, were choosing to use their positions to create moments of joy for others. It wasn't something they were required to do or something they would receive public recognition for. It was simply an act of human kindness, made more remarkable by the fact that they were learning this lesson so young. "Your Highnesses," James said carefully, "what you've taught me today is something I'll treasure always. You've shown me that respect and kindness don't have to follow the same rules as protocol and duty. They can exist alongside them, making everything better." As if sensing that their time together was drawing to a close, George stepped closer to James. "Captain Morrison, thank you for being someone we can trust. And thank you for helping me understand that feeling worried sometimes doesn't make me weak. And thank you for making us feel like regular children sometimes," Charlotte added with a smile that lit up her entire face. James watched as the two young royals gathered their things and prepared to continue with their day. As they walked away, he heard Charlotte whisper to her brother, "I think we made him really happy." And George's whispered reply, "I think we made ourselves really happy too." Standing alone in the corridor, James looked down at his gifts and felt a profound shift in how he viewed his role at the palace. He was still a guard, still bound by protocol and duty, but he was also something more now. He was a friend, a confidant, a person trusted by the future generation of the royal family. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting everything in a warm golden light, and James felt as though he was seeing the palace with completely new eyes. 6 months had passed since the birthday gifts, and the relationship between James and the royal children had quietly evolved into something that enriched all their lives. James found himself looking forward not just to his conversations with George, but to the moments when Charlotte would stop by with questions about his family, or when young Prince Louis would wave enthusiastically whenever he spotted the friendly guard during family outings in the palace gardens. The change in James hadn't gone unnoticed by his colleagues or superiors. he carried himself with a new sense of purpose, and his interactions with all members of the royal household had become warmer and more genuine. What none of them knew was that his transformation had begun with a 10-year-old boy's simple question about feeling sad sometimes. On this crisp autumn morning, James arrived at the palace to find unusual activity. There were additional security personnel, extra vehicles in the courtyard, and the kind of organized chaos that indicated an important event was taking place. As he took his post, his supervisor, Commander Williams, approached with a serious expression. "Morrison, we have a situation today that requires our absolute best," Williams began. "There's a state visit happening, and we'll have foreign dignitaries throughout the palace. The royal family will be hosting an official lunch, and afterward, there will be a private moment where Prince William plans to present Prince George to the visiting heads of state as future king." James straightened his shoulders. "Understood, sir. What are my specific duties?" "You'll be positioned at the main corridor intersection, ensuring smooth traffic flow and maintaining security during the transitions between events. This is Prince George's first formal presentation as heir to foreign leaders, so everything must be flawless." As the morning progressed, James watched the careful choreography of royal protocol unfold. Staff members moved with practiced precision, every detail planned and executed perfectly. He saw Prince William and Catherine greeting their guests with the grace and confidence that came from years of experience, but when Prince George appeared, James noticed something different. The boy who had confided his worries about being good enough now stood straight and composed, shaking hands with foreign ministers and ambassadors with natural poise. Yet James, who had learned to read the subtle signs, could see the slight tension in George's shoulders. The way his smile was perfect, but required effort. During a brief lull in the proceedings, as the delegation moved from one reception room to another, George caught James's eye across the corridor. The prince's formal expression softened for just a moment, and James saw a flicker of the vulnerable child who had asked about feeling sad sometimes. Without thinking, James offered the slightest nod of encouragement, a gesture that said, "You're doing wonderfully," in a language they had developed over months of quiet conversations. George's smile became more genuine, his shoulders relaxed slightly, and he continued with the formal proceedings with renewed confidence. James felt a surge of pride that surprised him with its intensity. He was witnessing not just a royal duty being performed, but a young person growing into his destiny with grace and humanity. The formal presentations concluded successfully, and as the foreign delegation prepared to depart, James expected the day's excitement to wind down. Instead, he was approached by a palace aide who informed him that Prince William wanted to speak with him privately. James found himself in one of the palace's smaller reception rooms, standing before Prince William, Catherine, and their 3 children. The formal atmosphere of the morning had given way to something more relaxed, though James still felt the weight of the unexpected summons. "Captain Morrison," Prince William began, "Catherine and I wanted to speak with you about something important." James's mind raced through possibilities, wondering if perhaps he had overstepped boundaries in his friendship with the children. "Of course, Your Royal Highness." Catherine stepped forward with a warm smile. "James, may I call you James? We wanted you to know that what you've done for our children, particularly for George, hasn't gone unnoticed." "I'm not sure I understand, Your Royal Highness," James replied carefully. Prince George stepped closer to his parents. "Father, Mother, may I tell Captain Morrison what we discussed?" At Prince William's nod, George looked directly at James with mature eyes. "Captain Morrison, my parents asked me about why I seemed more confident lately, especially during difficult days like today. I told them about our conversations, about how you helped me understand that feeling worried sometimes is normal, and that being a good leader means caring about people." James felt his face flush with emotion. Your Highness, I only shared what I believed to be true. Which is exactly why it meant so much, Catherine said softly. James, George told us how you knelt down to speak with him at eye level, how you shared your own experiences and made him feel heard and understood. As parents, we can't tell you how grateful we are that our son has found someone he trusts, someone who sees him as a person first and a future king second. Prince William stepped forward. James, in all the years you've served this family, your dedication has been exemplary, but what you've given our children goes far beyond professional duty. You've given them the gift of genuine friendship and guidance. The truth is, Catherine continued, we've been looking for ways to show our appreciation for what you've done, not just as a guard, but as someone who has helped shape our children's understanding of what it means to be both royal and human. James felt overwhelmed by their words, but it was what happened next that would stay with him forever. Prince George reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Captain Morrison, my parents have written a letter of recommendation for you. They've spoken with the head of palace security, and if you want it, there's a position available as a senior advisor for royal protection. You would help train other guards about the importance of connecting with people, not just protecting them. James stared at the envelope, hardly able to believe what he was hearing. A promotion that would recognize not just his years of service, but his ability to build human connections while maintaining professional excellence. The decision is entirely yours, Prince William said. But we wanted you to know that what you've taught our children about kindness, respect, and genuine care for others is exactly the kind of wisdom we want throughout the entire palace staff. Charlotte, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. And if you take the new job, you'll still be able to talk with us sometimes, right? James knelt down to Charlotte's level, remembering how meaningful that gesture had been in his first real conversation with George. Your Royal Highness, if I'm fortunate enough to continue serving your family, I promise that friendship and respect will always be part of how I do my job. Young Prince Louis, not fully understanding the adult conversation, but sensing the emotional importance of the moment, walked over and hugged James's leg. I like Captain Morrison, he announced simply. James felt tears threatening to overwhelm him as he gently patted Louis's head. Looking up at the royal family, he saw not just the formal monarchy he had served for 3 decades, but a group of people who valued kindness, who noticed when someone went beyond their job requirements to care about others, and who understood that true leadership meant lifting others up. Your Royal Highnesses, James said, his voice thick with emotion, 30 years ago, I began working for this family because I believed in service and duty. Today, I understand that the greatest service I could ever provide is to help teach the future generation that power and kindness can exist together, that royal duty and human compassion are not opposites, but partners. Prince William smiled and extended his hand to James. Welcome to your new position, Senior Advisor Morrison. As James shook the prince's hand, he felt the weight of history and the promise of the future converging in that moment. Prince George stepped forward and offered his own handshake, no longer the worried boy who had asked about feeling sad, but a confident young man who understood that true strength came from caring about others. Thank you, Captain Morrison, George said formally, then added with a smile, Senior Advisor Morrison. Thank you for teaching me that being royal means being responsible for other people's happiness, and that the best way to do that is to really see them and care about them. James shook the young prince's hand with deep respect, understanding that he was witnessing something remarkable. This boy, who would someday be king, had learned lessons about leadership and humanity that would serve him and his future subjects well. And James had been privileged to be part of that learning. As the family began to move toward the door, Prince George paused and looked back at James one more time. Senior Advisor Morrison, will you remember to tell the other guards that feeling worried sometimes is normal, and that the best way to protect people is to first care about them? James stood straight, not in the rigid posture of formal protocol, but in the confident stance of someone who understood his true purpose. Your Royal Highness, it would be my honor to share that wisdom, and I'll make sure they understand that it came from a future king who cares more about people than power. As the royal family left the room, James remained standing in the golden afternoon light streaming through the palace windows. He thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, beginning with a vulnerable child's honest question, and culminating in a new role that would let him help others understand the true meaning of royal service. Walking through the palace corridors toward his new office, James carried with him not just the pride of promotion, but the profound respect that came from witnessing genuine kindness in action. Prince George's quiet compassion had not only stunned the palace, it had transformed everyone it touched, creating ripples of positive change that would influence the royal household for generations to come. James smiled as he thought about the conversations yet to come, the guards yet to be trained, and the young prince who had taught him that the most important protocol of all was simply to care about the people around you with authentic kindness and respect.